I'm looking like she's standing up now because she's kind of peeping me walking out of the door. And I'm looking like, am I going to have to get into a tussle in church? Am I really going to have to fight? Hello and welcome to my channel. It's me, Gabrielle B. Mills, known right here on YouTube as The Church Consultant. And today I am excited to launch the first episode in my podcast series called Church Stories. Now, we all know that some wild things happen in church, and this is the place to share your story. So here, I will share church stories and then discuss some takeaways that we can all learn and benefit from. If you have a church or a nonprofit story that you would like to share, click the Submit My Church Story link in the description box below for more information. If you are a church leader, volunteer, or just a lover of all things church, subscribe to my channel for more church-related content. Ooh, I'm excited. So now, without further ado, let's jump into the first episode of our Church Stories series. And of course, I cannot kick off this podcast series without telling one of my very own personal and extremely outrageous church stories. Buckle up and let's get into it. But before we jump into the details of my story, I wanted to share some background information about what was happening at the time that this specific church story incident happened. I think that knowing some background information might help us have a little bit of compassion for the crazy lady, which she calls herself this in the story, which we will find out later. But of course, first, some background information. Okay, so at the time of this incident, in the area where I was living, there was a terrible flood. And just like any natural disaster, people were horribly impacted by the flood. Even I had to evacuate. Here, I'll put a few pictures of the flood that I took while I was leaving. And even in these pictures, you can see, I'll try to show it. You can see someone's car is completely underneath water. There was literally water everywhere, as would be expected for a flood. But this flood was unique because it impacted people who did not live in traditional flood zones or who had never been impacted by a flood before, and they were not prepared. Now, for those of you who don't know what flood zones are, excuse me. Lot better. So, if you don't know what flood zones are and why they are important, let me briefly explain. And for everyone else who already knows what flood zones are, just bear with me, because this is really important to the story. So flood zones are geographical areas that FEMA, which stands for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, have defined according to varying levels of flood risk. So, for instance, take this map that I pulled from the FEMA website. Okay, on this map, you'll see various markings in color that indicate varying levels of flood risk. You will also notice the gray areas on this map. Because I am no expert in reading FEMA maps, we just need to understand that in general, areas in color represent some sort of flood potential and some sort of flood impact, whereas areas in gray do not. Simply put, I call the areas in color flood areas and the areas in gray the non-flood zone areas. Now, this is important because traditionally, residents who lived in non-flood zone areas did not have to have flood insurance. Now, going back to a few moments ago, I said that this particular flood primarily impacted people in the non-flood zone areas, which meant that most people, including myself, did not have flood insurance. I remember calling my insurance company at this time, and they were just so particular when they called. Hello, you're calling about the flood. Are you calling about rising waters, or are you calling about a pipe bursting inside your home? They wanted to make sure that if you were calling about rising waters and you did not have flood insurance, you were not getting covered at all. So you can only imagine that after the flood waters receded, times were extremely rough. People needed to secure contractors, they needed to repair their homes. They had a challenging time doing all of this because they did not have flood insurance. So the insurance companies would not pay. Trust me, guys, we tried. They would not pay or help with any of the damages. And people, they needed money and they just didn't have any of it. So that's the backdrop of the story. So insert the story here. So at this time, I was working for a church, and one of the responsibilities of my job was to help manage the benevolence program that they had at the church. And initially, during the first couple of months after the flood, we were inundated with donations and support, and people from all around the country came in with cleaning crews and supplies. And we had churches constantly contacting us, asking us what we needed and what could we bring. And people brought in truckloads and materials literally by the truckload, water, toiletries, you name it. And it was such a blessing. Well, as with any natural disaster, as time passed, as is, like I said, naturally expected, we began to receive less and less donations and less support. And also around this time, the need amongst the impacted members began to shift from needing materials and cleaning supplies and toiletries to actually needing money. Remember, insurance was not helping them out. So it was no longer items like water, toiletries, and all the other things that people were generously donating. It shifted to, we need your money. We need money and we don't have it. We want to repair our house. Without the help of flood insurance, many of our members had to pay for their flood repairs out of pocket or little at a time while they negotiated payment arrangements with their vendors. And during this time at the church, I began to receive like several calls a day of verified members asking for help. And in general, the conversations would go something like, can the church help with giving us, let's just say, $250? We ran out of cash and we need that money as a deposit to tie up our electrician or our drywall or a contractor, etc., etc. You fill in the blank. So just imagine call after call after call of verified members. And I'm talking about, I personally knew these people on a first name basis, and I would have to tell them, I'm sorry, but the church is not providing monetary support at this time. You're welcome to come get some food or some tangible item. And although that was great and everything, I could just hear the sadness, the eye roll in their voice, like, come on, minister. They were all very respectful. I can say that. Like, none of them said anything crazy to me on the phone, but I could just hear like that disappointment in their voice. Like, we need help. Like, we need money. If you can give me 250, I can secure this guy and work along the way. But that wasn't part of the program at the time. And so after so many calls like this, I began to take this information to our leadership team, and I asked if there was anything that we could do. And they ultimately decided that we would create a temporary program for people specifically impacted by the flood who did not have flood insurance, who were vetted, and we provided a certain fixed monetary amount. And this initiative was approved by the board and we put it into action. So I pause here because looking back now, I'm not sure if that was the right thing to do, but in the moment with the pressures that were at hand, We felt like that was the right thing to do for our people in the community. And so that's what we did. Now, insert crazy lady right here. She's about to make her royal appearance. So one Sunday, after we put this program in place, I arrived at church really late. I mean, really late, y'all. Like embarrassingly late for a minister, like midway through the last service. And at the time, I think the church had, I think they had 4 services at the time. And so I missed service 1, missed service 2, missed service 3. This is not advised practice for anyone in leadership. And midway through the first service, I arrived. And the police officer found me and he asked me if I had scheduled a meeting with someone because a lady had been waiting to speak with me. And initially, this might not seem so odd, until you understand the fact that this lady came to the first service and essentially waited 3 services to talk to me. Strange. That is not normal behavior. So after the police officer explained to me that she waited, I quickly explained to him, no, I don't have a meeting planned. I'm not expecting anyone. And quite frankly, I think after that, I quickly forgot about it and I didn't think anything of it. So when church ended, I typically go with the finance team to make sure that all of the donations are counted and make it back to the bank. And then we all go home. And usually by this time, all the people are gone and the church and the facilities are empty. This is important. And of course, I'm supposed to go home at this point. But instead of me leaving with everyone else, like I should have, I decided I need to go back to my office and do some work. I always do this. It's not good. It's not safe. I assumed, big mistake, that being in my office was okay because the building was locked. I didn't really see anyone. I could tell it was clearing out, nor did I really hear anyone. So I'm thinking everything's clearing out. I'm just going to be in my office for a little bit. So you can only imagine my surprise when I get a knock at my door after about 15 minutes of me working. And of course, instead of me acting like I could not hear the knock, or at the very least, acting like I had headphones on or just something to give me a reason not to open the knock, no, I don't do any of that. Don't do any of that. Instead, I walk right over to my door that has no peepholes, no windows, no nothing, and I open it. And there stood before me was a lady I had never seen in my entire life. And she looks me dead in my face and says, "Are you Minister Mills?" And she caught me completely off guard by knowing my name. So I'm like reeling back a little bit. And I'm like, yes. But my brain is like, how do you know my name? I have no idea who you are. And then while I'm kind of in that state, she slightly pushes her way in my office and says, "I need to talk to you." So I'm taken aback by all of this by this time. And she's basically in my office when I said, "Okay, come in." But then I'm thinking like, you're already in my office. So I mean, telling you to come in, you already did that part. And I looked at her for a little bit I looked at her with a little bit of caution, given the facts, right? So she sits on, like if I could show, like she sits on this side of my desk and I am like this side of my desk where my computer is. And I have some chairs over there and I sit on the other side with my computer. Then I ask her, "How can I help you?" But keep in mind, like I'm on guard. I felt like I shouldn't have opened the door. And she immediately responds in like a strong, entitled tone. Like, "I heard you giving out money to people impacted by the flood, and I was impacted, and I need the money, and I need you to cut me a check right now." And y'all, I know I'm saved because the words that I wanted to say on the inside, Lord, Lord have mercy. Her flow and just everything, like it was a complete switch up. Oh, are you Minister Mills? All nice, cordial, slightly jovial, walking, innocently, if you will, into the office. It still kind of put me off guard. But then her tone immediately, like, yeah, I need this, I need that. And I was like, oh, Lord. Well, the Holy Spirit held me together. And instead I said, okay, ma'am, I understand. But first, let me check a few things. Now, one thing that I want to make clear about the benevolence program is that it had very clear rules that were approved by the board. So I was not in position in any way to change them, modify them, nothing. The program was the program. The rules were the rules. The process that we had in place was the process. So while I sat in front of my computer, I began to ask her the vetting questions just to see if she would qualify. And we had like a priority list as well. So I was checking to see if she was on the priority list. Did she pass the vetting process? And y'all, everything I was checking was coming back denied or no search results found. I'm talking nothing, not a thing I could do for her as it related to the program. So I sat up straight in my chair. I'm already on edge because, I already know she's peculiar. She's acting kind of strange already. And I put on my most calm, my most reassuring voice that I could muster up. And I'm trying to be understanding. I understand the flood and everything. And I say, okay, ma'am, I'm searching on my computer and I am really looking and I am unable to qualify you for our flood relief program. And also, I don't see your name here on our priority list. So unfortunately, at this time, I can't do anything further as it relates to our flood program and the benevolence program we have set for that. However, we have a general benevolence program that you could qualify for, ... And before I could even explain the benefits and all of that we had in our general benevolence program process, I just saw her countenance fall and she started looking strange. It wasn't like her countenance fell because she was sad, because she felt like she was being rejected from the immediate relief that came from the flood program. It was like her countenance fell, but she was looking strange. That's the only way that I can describe it. She started looking at me strange. She was looking at the office strange, like delusional, like that. All of a sudden she just morphed from being with us here on planet Earth to like a different place. She's looking around kind of strange. And, it was like she was really struggling to understand what I was saying, but, or maybe perhaps struggling to just, I don't know. She had a lot going on. And I was like, okay, like I'm here, I'm watching this lady in a strange sort of trance-like state. And immediately it catches me off guard. So I stand up and I grab my keys from the desk because I'm like, I have had to deny people before for this program. And I'm not proud of that, Unfortunately, just the funds are limited and we've had to deny all types of people for this specific program. And they like never gave me this sort of type of response. So you already barged into my office, number one. Number two, you talked to me kind of nice at the door. Then you changed your tone up while you're sitting on the other side of my desk. And number three, you're looking really strange. Your whole message that you're sending to me right now has me on edge. So I'm standing up. I have my keys. And so I start looking at her standing. And y'all, I kid you not, I'm standing behind my desk with my back towards the door. So the door is over here. And I literally have my keys. I didn't care about anything else in my office at that time. And I am slowly walking backwards as slowly as possible because I see her state trying to get out of my office. And she is still in the innermost part of my office, furthest away from me inside those chairs. And that lady looked at me and out of nowhere took her two God-given hands and knocked everything off my desk. Like, boom, knocks everything off my desk. And at this point, y'all, everything just starts to move in complete slow motion. I start asking myself, like, is this really happening? Did this lady just knock all my stuff off my desk? She knocked my computer off my desk. Like, everything is on the desk. I'm looking like she's standing up now because she's kind of peeping me walking out of the door. And I'm looking like, am I going to have to get into a tussle in church? Am I really going to have to fight this lady that is starting to approach me after she has just thrown everything on my desk onto the floor? And while I'm thinking these thoughts, the lady gets up from her chair. Well, she was kind of already up. She was getting up. But remember, everything is moving in slow motion. So she's getting up. And as she lunges towards me, she yells out of her mouth, "I'm crazy." And I was like, and to dodge her attack, I began to back up in the hallway. So like if this is the door, I'm pretty much here and she's coming out of my doorway towards me. And thank the Lord, I did not close the door behind me. So my door was propped open. It's such a blessing that my door was propped open because it allowed me to get out. Of course, it did allow her to also advance towards me. And I kid you not, while I was in the hallway, she's coming out, "I'm crazy." And she's coming out to get me, and like an angel sent from the Lord, a police officer must have heard her crashing my stuff to the floor, or must have heard the crash of my stuff falling to the floor. And out of nowhere, this police officer comes and stops the lady, just hits that lady across her chest to prevent her from getting to me, and yells at her, "I'm crazier than you." Y'all, true story. This happened to me. I mean, I tell you, crazy things, and this is an outlier. This doesn't happen every day, but crazy things definitely happened at church. And he came and got her, stopped her right here, yelled at her, "I'm crazier than you." And y'all, at this point, I had already had my keys in my hand, and I swiftly grabbed my bag out of the office space, and I was out of there. Like, I was so gone. I was so over it, so gone, so rattled. I mean, anybody would be rattled. Here I was praising Jesus. Granted, I was late, but I did catch some of the worship experience. It's such a jovial time praising the Lord. And then someone's trying to jump me over a donation, literally getting up, trying to convince me that they were crazy, slamming my stuff on the ground. And if it wasn't for the police officer, who probably saw that I was still there, was probably still checking on the building, coming in to my rescue, I mean, we don't even know. I mean, honestly, still to this day, I don't know what happened to that lady. All I know is that when I left, she was with the law enforcement, and I was not about to stick around to see what was going to happen to that lady or anything. That was it. She already told me she was crazy. I saw she was acting crazy, and I believe her. Y'all, my story was absolutely wild, but there is so much that we can learn from it. So let's explore a few takeaways together. Okay, so if I were to relive that crazy experience and the crazy lady again, these are takeaways and things I would have coached myself to be aware of. The first is be aware and be alert for atypical behavior. See, when the officer told me that this lady waited for 3 services, 1, 2, 3 and a half, by the way, 3 services, basically technically 4 services, I should have known that it was a red flag immediately. Typical behavior is that people come to church and people go home. I was just caught off guard, right? This is why I say church leaders, church administrators, church executives, and volunteers need regular training on safety and abnormal crowd behavior. I would suggest at least annually them getting this sort of training. And this could happen by hiring a third party to train your team or even contacting your local police office and seeing what resources they have to offer you to improve the safety and the security of your worship experience. You're building your team. I mean, this doesn't necessarily guarantee that with the training, things would have been any different for me personally, but I do feel like it could have been helpful and perhaps made me more aware of my surroundings. Now, we all know that the true hero of this story is the police officer that came literally out of nowhere and saved me. So, of course, I'm biased, but my next takeaway is that churches should consider having trained security staff on their church premises. So, takeaway number one, making sure that churches and church leaders and volunteers are trained to identify abnormal behavior. And number two, that trained security staff are on the church premises. So I know there are still several ongoing debates in Christian circles about whether we should have police officers and security in church and on church premises. And usually when this conversation occurs, the most common points of the dispute are usually along the lines of security versus no security at all, armed versus unarmed, and in uniform versus undercover or unidentifiable. But for me personally, and I'm no security expert, but this is just my opinion, I lean towards having armed, fully equipped, identifiable police officers or off-duty police officers at your worship experience. Now, I fully understand that there are people who feel as though officers or off-duty police officers who are armed and in identifiable uniforms might incite fear or anxiety in their congregants or even make it appear that their worship experience is unsafe. And to this, I say an armed and identifiable police presence at church does not equal unsafe. So the narrative is that if you have an armed police officer, it automatically equals in the equation unsafe. And we just tell ourselves this, and it's just not true, right? So for example, when you walk into Walmart and you see security, we don't say to ourselves, we got to get back in our car because Walmart's not safe. It just doesn't happen. Or when we go to a theme park and there's a bunch of kids and bunch of people and we're there with our kids and we see security in uniform, we don't wrangle our kids and run back to our vehicles and tell them we have to go home because this park is unsafe. When we go to the movies and we see security, we don't say, I can't watch this movie because, I feel unsafe because there was security presence there. And the list could go on and on and on. In fact, I think the opposite is true, that when we are in a public environment with a lot of people, having identifiable security can make some people, including myself, feel more safe. For some people, there is a peace in knowing that if something were to happen, that I know there are people ready to take action, and I know specifically I need to go to a specific person who is identifiable that can address any of my issues or my concerns. Now, I understand that placement of these officers can be another point of contention, right? I have been in worship experiences where the police officers and the security staff are like right in your face. They're like right up front where they're very, very visible, or they're literally on stage right next to the senior pastor or standing in the cut near a curtain or something like that. And those types of placements can be distracting, right? If I actually came into a worship experience and saw an army of officers and a bunch of identifiable security, then yes, I would feel like unsafe because that's abnormal, right? When I go to Walmart, we don't see people, walking with security to get the product. Or when I'm at the movies, they're not just all over in your face. I'm at the movies and police officers, like if you have an over abundance of police presence, then I can understand the sentiments of perhaps identifiable armed can make a place feel unsafe. But I think that there is a lot of ways to be inconspicuous with the placement of police staff in church. For example, very easy, right there in the parking lot. It's expected to see police in the parking lot. If anyone asks, oh, why is there police on campus? They're helping us with the flow of traffic. They're helping us get you in and out of service timely. There's so many ways that you can explain that, but then it's still very helpful to make sure that people's cars aren't being damaged or any of those types of things. And yet, if something were to happen, you have someone right there that can take action. So I get it. Placement of officers, and I'm kind of going a little bit on a tangent on that, but placement of officers can be a little off-putting if they're not in the right place, but I am still an advocate of making sure that you have an officer. And of course, from my story, I am biased because that officer stepped in at a time that I needed him the most to neutralize a real attack that could have led to who knows what. So I'm forever grateful. Which brings us to takeaway number 3, interior cameras. My third takeaway for this church story is churches should consider having interior cameras. At the time of this incident, the church I was working for only had exterior cameras. And as we all know, wild things can happen in church, and having interior cameras can be super helpful. If we had interior cameras, I would have not had to check to see who was standing at my door without opening it, right? So if I had interior cameras, I could have opened the app. I could have looked at the app because remember, we had no peepholes, no windows. This was an old school church and all the officers were kind of lined up on this firewall thing. So we couldn't really have a lot going on there. And if we would have had cameras, I would have flipped it open, would have saw a stranger. Maybe I wouldn't have opened the door, right? And also, I would have had a record of the video just in case it came into question what happened that day. Now, fortunately for me, it never came into question what happened that day. Nothing ever became of it. And that's such a blessing. But, she could have said this happened, or I knocked the stuff down on her, and having cameras with a video would have been a protection for me and a protection for her. So I like to tell people it is better to have interior cameras and not need them than to need interior cameras and not have them, especially when we consider how relatively inexpensive interior cameras are and how easy you can install them. For example, I personally use Waze interior cameras, and my husband and I, we hook them up ourselves. We pay a fee for extended cloud storage, and we quickly have access to needed video footage. We can scroll back. I mean, sometimes it's the simplest thing, like, did the package, was it delivered? Was it not delivered? Or did the mail person come? Anything. Like, you'd be surprised what you begin to use those interior cameras for just to check. It doesn't always have to be something malicious or egregious. Sometimes you just want to look, you want to check outside, And if you want to check out the Waze cameras that we use, I will leave that link in the description box below because it was super helpful and relatively inexpensive. And if you're looking for something more substantial, you can always hire a professional to come in and install your cameras, or you can even buy cameras that are relatively inexpensive or really great price, but you don't want the cords and all of that hanging all over. And a professional can come in and run the lines and the cords that are more aesthetically pleasing for you. Now, if you're on a tight budget and you cannot get your entire facility equipped, I would prioritize these following areas. Number one, cameras in the hallways, because cameras in the hallway allows you to see the coming and going. And as I mentioned before, having cameras in the hallway allow the people that are inside, whatever room it is, it doesn't necessarily just need to be an office, but allows them to see who is outside. Is it an assailant? Is it a person that's just distraught? Is it a mom just trying to come in to grab their child? Like, it's very important to be able to have those for recall, but also for actively using it in the moment. So cameras in the hallways. The second place is cameras in front of bathrooms. Now, don't get weirded out by this. Please don't get weirded out. It's not for any strange purpose, but it is very important for us to see the coming and going of restrooms. Wild things can happen in restrooms, largely in part because, you're not allowed to have cameras inside restrooms, right? So people go into restrooms for privacy, as they should. But in church, in ministry, in nonprofits, we want to be able to have cameras in front of bathrooms and restrooms, especially in your kid spaces, because if an unauthorized adult walks in to a kid space, you want to be able to know that. You want to have that on camera. If any of the kids ever complain about something happening, a fight or anything inside the bathroom, you want to be able to have that camera in front of those bathrooms to see the coming of goings, to also see the disposition, right? If some kid unfortunately hits another kid in the bathroom, he goes in, he's not red in the face, he comes out, he is. That's, evidence that you would need when you're talking to both parents. Another thing, the teen restrooms, right? We don't like to talk about it, but some of our babies that we love so much, they're excited to go to church for not Jesus. So just because we're saved doesn't mean that all of our babies are saved, even though it breaks my heart, but some of them come to know Jesus at a different point. And they push those restroom doors open, checking to see if anyone is in there. And sometimes Bob grabs Becky and they do very married stuff inside those bathrooms. Not going to elaborate, but just reiterating that it is imperative that in front of definitely the kids' bathrooms, all of your teen bathrooms, and even the adult bathrooms, just on the exterior part, of course, to place some interior cameras there just to help with the coming and going. Now, in this vein, if you will, of bathrooms, because I know it can get touchy. I'm not saying anything. It can be really touchy. I get that. I have seen a rise in bathroom attendance. A lot of larger ministries have a volunteer position of a person that is inside the bathroom to clean it, to make sure that nothing is happening inside the bathrooms that are inappropriate, to be of assistance and service to people that are in the bathroom. I don't know how I feel about that. So you leave a comment below on your thoughts on bathroom attendance inside church and nonprofit restrooms. All right. So we have cameras in front of bathrooms. We have cameras in front of hallways. And the last place, if you're on a tight budget, I would say put interior cameras in front of hazardous places. When I'm thinking hazardous inside church, I'm thinking baptismal areas. So any place that has water, of course, your kitchen, the things that have fires, stoves, etc. Hazardous areas, again, meaning like big stairs or big step down. I remember I was working with a church and they had these beautiful stairs in their church, right? They needed interior cameras and the stairs were just absolutely hands down gorgeous. The bride would come down and her veil would just fall down these gorgeous stairs, and they're beautiful for weddings. Not so beautiful for the everyday functioning of church. I remember going to that church one time, not during a wedding, and I saw people that were kind of on the geriatric side, but still not wanting to take the elevator that was right next to the church, trying to attempt to take the stairs. Don't know why, but they were doing it. Maybe they didn't want to wait for the elevator because it was a little slow. I also saw babies who are still kind of wobbly on their feet, trying to take the stairs. So your mind can go to places that my mind was kind of going, like, whoo, probably need some cameras here for just in case grandma misses her step or just in case one of the baby tumbles. You want to have these accidents on footage, not just word of mouth explaining different things to people. And I will say, the last place to put interior cameras, if you cannot get your whole facility done, is cameras in places where money is being exchanged. Now, I know some of you are like, okay, Gabrielle, like that is totally a given, but you'd be surprised at how many churches that I have the privilege of helping or going to and experiencing the backside of their operations, and there's no interior cameras. Zilch. Money is just changing hands loosey goosey, still inside church. Now, one thing that is unique to church compared to many other places of operation is that we still deal in a lot of cash, right? We pass the offertory basket around and people usually put cash inside there. And so, compared to exchanges that happen in other places, churches, similar to casinos, we deal in a lot of cash. So, you have to have some cameras where your money is located. I remember watching something, maybe I'll find it and link it, but I was watching this video of a lady that was counting money so fast. She was actually working in a casino, counting money so fast, and she was stealing, like she was doing something with her hands that was happening so fast that even the cameras from the video, it was hard to pick up on it. So we always like to believe that everything is going to demonstrate. We like to believe, that everyone is going to demonstrate the love of God and all of his characteristics. And yes, we know firsthand that that does not always happen. For example, there's a story of a church bookkeeper, true story. She was let's see, I think it was 35 years. Yeah, she had been working for the church for 35 years. She had fallen on hard times and she kept a ledger and she took $20,000 from the church with every intention of paying it back. She kept the ledger. She didn't keep the ledger because she was trying to steal. She kept the ledger because I believe she was on a fixed income and she had fallen on hard times. So she would just, 20, 100, little here, little there. Well, of course, one of the deacons found it out. She was no longer the bookkeeper. I think they even moved forward with some other form of reprimation. What is the word I'm looking for? Punishment. I hate the word punishment, but just other form of corrective action. You all know what I'm trying to say. But the moral is that this is really sad and it can happen inside church. And this is the reason why we have to have systems in place to be prepared. I feel as though that if this church would have had some interior cameras, maybe they would have noticed the need. Maybe it wouldn't have ballooned all the way to $20,000. And maybe something could have been done prior. Doesn't mean she would have still been the bookkeeper, but done to help her situation at large. And the fourth and final takeaway for this church story, even though there's probably, I know for sure that there are a bunch more things that we can elaborate on, but the fourth one is prevention is always best. From this story, prevention is key. Just having some good old-fashioned common sense or the listening to the Holy Spirit and what he's actually telling you. I would have listened to the Holy Spirit. I probably would have just ignored the knock at the door. There was this kind of, I'm busy. I don't know who's on the other side of that door. Maybe I should just continue doing what I'm doing. But the Holy Spirit was leading and I didn't listen. And there is no reason why I should have opened that door, honestly, especially since I thought at that time that I was maybe the only one in church or one of the last people in the church building, and essentially thought when I sat at my desk that I was kind of by myself. And when I kind of asked the lady, like, who is it? I didn't really recognize the person on the other side of the door. And as soon as I opened the door, she had the advantage. When she said my name, she threw me off guard. She knew my name. I had no idea who she was. And hindsight is always 2020. And I was still shaking my head every time I remember this story. I do. I just stop to think like, Gabrielle, oh, there's this kind of loop that your brain can go in, either fight or flight, or when you're kind of defending yourself. And she had me just on my heels. And so prevention is key. I should have never opened the door, right? Prevention is always best. So I know in church that there is this pressure, at least I kind of felt like that, to always feel as though we have to spring into action or spring into service to help another person. But the truth is that this incident could have never happened had I, number one, gone home with everyone else, which was our typical Sunday protocol. And number two, if I would have never opened that door. Guys, I can't stress it enough. Prevention is always best. Nothing can happen if the situation never arises. Not in a million years could I have imagined almost getting into a fight at church. That thought never crossed my mind, but it happened. And I generally don't subscribe to the idea of desperate times calling for desperate measures, but still, I can only imagine the stress and the desperation the lady in my story must have been facing at the time to act in such a shocking manner. And although I use this story, this church story, as a teaching tool for some reason, even though I basically was almost attacked, my heart still goes out to the lady in the story. Seriously, it does. And still to this day, I have no idea what happened to her, but I do genuinely pray that despite me not being able to help her, that everything worked out for her. And that, my friends, concludes episode 1 of our Church Stories series. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Comment below your thoughts about the takeaways and share any new takeaway that you want to add to the conversation. We'd love to hear your church story, so click that link in the description box to share your unique church story with us. We can't wait to receive it, and we're looking forward to reading it. Also, too, if you want to connect with us, you can connect with The Church Consultant by visiting our website at www.thechurchconsultant.org or find us on Facebook at The Church Consultant Tribe. Now, this is one of my favorites because if you love to read or if you just want to learn more about church administration, church leadership, and topics associated with church and nonprofit, join the Church Consultant Book Club. I will leave all the information for TCC Book Club in the description box below. All right, guys, this has been great. Thank you for listening. If you've made it this far in the video, I have been able to finally share one of my most shocking stories, but more importantly, I hope that it has been helpful to you. And as always, remember the work that we are doing is impactful and our mission to spread the gospel is meaningful. And until next time, be blessed.